Okay, so we often hear, one particular story about Putin's leadership, mostly from a Western angle. But today, we're going to try something different. We're diving into the internal worldview, the set of beliefs that, from within Russia, seems to keep his rule legitimate. It seems centered entirely on this idea of national restoration.
Yeah, and to really get why this system holds up, you absolutely have to look back to the 1990s. And it's not just like general chaos people talk about. It was concrete trauma, rapid privatization, savings vanishing overnight, rampant corruption, and this really devastating loss of global dignity. That whole environment created this, profound political vacuum. It practically demanded a reviver, someone to bring order. And Putin stepped into that role. That initial success, bringing back some stability, that must have established the initial trust, right? But the mandate, it's clearly evolved since then. The analysis we've been looking at, it breaks this legitimacy down into 4 pillars. They all depend on each other. We probably need to unpack these: state sovereignty, economic resilience, multipolarity, and traditional values. Exactly. So if the starting point, the absolute prerequisite, was surviving that potential state collapse, then the solution from their perspective had to be about regaining control. Absolute control, really. So the first pillar is this absolute state sovereignty. It requires what some analysts call the vertical of power, an authoritarian corrective, basically.
That vertical of power, that's a pretty severe trade-off they're presenting. It's a very specific kind of social contract, isn't it? Where giving up certain political freedoms isn't seen as a failure, but actually as the necessary price you pay for guaranteeing state survival and basic security, especially after the memory of the 90s collapse.
Right. And you see the mechanics of that immediately. Look at the Ministry of Justice registering NGOs as foreign agents. It's designed quite deliberately to neutralize any elements they perceive as corrosive or, destabilizing to that centralized authority.
Okay, so if Pillar 1 secures the state itself, how did they handle the economy? Securing the wallet, so to speak. Because his initial legitimacy, as you said, was really tied to some spectacular material success early on. Weren't we talking like 94% GDP growth between 99 and 2008? Something huge like that. But that clearly changed. What was the shift there?
Well, what's fascinating here is exactly that evolution you mentioned. The current strategic priority, it isn't optimal growth anymore, not structural efficiency. It's internal stability, resilience. That's the key word now. So the state maintains this really rigid fiscal discipline, keeping debt low, balancing the budget, even if it means accepting slow growth, stagnation almost, as a, tolerable consequence. They're trying to intentionally insulate the state against external economic shocks, build fortress Russia in a way.
That makes sense. And that kind of financial resilience, it links directly into the counter-narrative they use internationally, doesn't it? We looked at some analysis suggesting that, from their viewpoint, any legitimate Russian leader would eventually have had to do some version of what Putin is now doing regarding Crimea, essentially framing the entire crisis as a necessary reaction to perceived NATO expansion.
Exactly. What's compelling, or maybe disturbing depending on your view, is how that narrative completely shifts the origin story of the crisis. It's designed to legitimize this big push towards a multipolar, maybe post-West order.
But doesn't that framing just completely sidestep the question of, proactive aggression? It's a powerful justification internally, maybe, but how do they practically go about dismantling U.S. hegemony? That requires allies, right? You can't do that alone.
And that's where they look to this strategic alignment, often labeled the CRINC grouping, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Now, this isn't some formal NATO-style alliance. It's more of a coalition, maybe united by shared grievances against the current international system. And it's essential for them, particularly for mitigating sanctions and securing material support.
Okay, so those geopolitical moves and alliances help secure the state externally, but there seems to be a deeper, more ideological pillar they're actively constructing too.
Yes, absolutely. The cultural defense pillar. And this is actually codified now in official state policy. Decree number 8 or 9, I think it was. It explicitly defines traditional Russian spiritual and moral values as a necessary defense against what they perceive as corrosive Western decadence.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Beyond just domestic policy, Russia seems to be actively positioning itself as a kind of global refuge for cultural conservatives. They're even reportedly granting temporary residence permits to foreigners who claim to reject, quote, destructive neoliberal ideological attitudes in their own home countries. It's like creating an ideological sphere of influence that isn't tied to geography.
So when you put it all together, the durability of the system, the power, it seems to rest on this pivot. It shifted from guaranteeing material growth, which was the focus in the early 2000s, to guaranteeing national sovereignty and increasingly cultural security today, post-2014 especially.
Yeah, and if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the Kremlin seems to have successfully linked economic hardship, structural weaknesses like lack of diversification, linked them directly to external attack. They essentially convert material shortcomings into a kind of patriotic necessity. We suffer because they attack us. So, what does it mean for global stability when a major power seems to intentionally prioritize the strategic resilience and political stability over long-term economic optimization? Definitely something for you to chew on.